Boston, the winningest sports city this century. Each championship deriving from a plan. Join us as we discuss the next Boston Banner Blueprint with your hosts, Josh Finkel, Nick Walsh, and Nate Philbrook.
What's up, everybody? Boston Banner Blueprint, first ever emergency pod. Talking Pats today. But first, Nate, take it away and plug those socials for us.
Yeah, of course. We always got to let everybody know where to find us. If you're not watching on YouTube and looking at the banner below, you can always find us on Twitter/X at Boston Banner BP, Instagram, Facebook at Boston Banner Blueprint, and of course, Spotify. And yes, we have Apple now, thank God, but Boston Banner Blueprint on both those, and as well as YouTube to look at our lovely faces. So kick us off.
Yeah, obviously not exactly breaking news now, but we got the news. Mike Vrabel, he's back in New England, head coach. Obviously, last time we saw him was at the Hall of Fame ceremony, Pat's Hall of Fame, when we saw him. But now he's our head coach, and I don't know really even where to begin. So I think it's a great time to, Nick, just tell us your thoughts, man.
So first off, as we talked last week on our first Patriots episode, we were all in agreement that Mike Vrabel was our choice. He was our number one choice. Mike Girardi came out this morning and tweeted, Mike Vrabel was always plan A, plan B, plan C. The only issue, if you're going to be a contrarian, and I have this issue too, because they didn't do it last year when they had the opportunity for the first head coaching search in 24 years, where you could really look outside the organization and get a feel on how different philosophies, different guys do the job. It was basic. Let's call it for what it was. It was a sham interview process. Like, I feel bad for Pep Johnson and Byron Leftwich because it was a slap in the face to the Rooney Rule. And for people who don't know what the Rooney Rule is, it's basically if you're interviewing for these high profile positions, head coaching, front office, you got to bring in 2 in-person interviews for minority candidates. And we can discuss at a later time if it's a good rule or not and the way teams take advantage of it. But Byron Leftwich and Pepper Johnson were not names that were being thrown out in this coaching carousel this time around. It was basically 2 guys that were not coaching in the playoffs, so they could bring them in right away, get the in-person interviews, and basically check off that box. And I think that was basically confirmed when Aaron Glenn basically said, yeah, thank you, but go pound sand, when they requested to interview him too. So at the end of the day, did the Patriots get the guy that we wanted? Yes. Was there another way they could have gone about it without spitting in the face of the Rooney Rule? Yes. But at the end of the day, we got the guy that I wanted, so I'm happy. Like, it's hard not to be happy getting Mike Vrabel in the building.
Yeah, and I think that, looking at the process, particularly on the back of the process that they used to hire Gerard Mayo last year, which really wasn't a process at all, I think that we are probably in agreement, maybe not. I guess we can talk about that here, but maybe an extensive search was warranted just based off of history and wanting to make sure that we were getting the exact right guy that we wanted. Now, I think that the Crafts probably identified that guy before Mayo was gone, right? I mean, he interviewed for the Jets, and just 2 days later that Mayo was out the door, and there was an interview set up for Vrabel to come in and interview with the Crafts. And the other piece too is that they identified their guy. It was pretty much always between Ben Johnson and Mike Vrabel. And I think that the biggest difference maker between the 2 candidates is Vrabel's a proven culture builder. And so if there's one thing that this team is in dire need of, is to set an identity, create a culture in the locker room, rally behind a shared vision of what the team and what the organization can pull together. I think that will that will move mountains in the terms of making an attractive place for free agents to want to sign. There's a proven guy there. There's now a legitimate arm at quarterback that people would be excited to either catch balls or protect for. And then you have guys like Gonzo on the backside of the defense that's going to make everybody's job a little bit easier on the defensive side of the ball. Now it's a matter of who's leading this group of men in order to inspire and get from point A to point B. And that's where I think that Vrabel really separated himself, is he's proven to be able to build that culture within an NFL organization and proven to win.
Yeah, ultimate players coach is Vrabel. He'll get in on drills, he'll strap up, show guys proper technique, how it's really supposed to be done. I mean, I'm really happy. I was leaning Johnson a little bit just because I want some offense in New England. I think we all want that, but you need, like you said, Nate, you need to set a culture, you need an identity, you need all these things, and there's no one better to do that than Mike Vrabel. I mean, he took a Titans team without Derrick Henry and took them to the 12-4 in the playoffs. So, like, that's without their best player.
I mean, he's spent the last year in Cleveland. It's my understanding that he and Stefanski partnered together this year, that Stefanski taught him the offensive side of the ball, and Vrabel taught Stefanski the strategic side of ball. And so if there's one thing that was blaringly obvious about Gerard Mayo, is that his clock management, his in-game strategic moves, his in-game adjustments, seriously lacking. And so I think that's where even just some competent play calling, some competent use of the clock, that Vrabel's an immediate step up and a step in the right direction for this organization.
I mean, you touched on with the clock management there, where we saw it early on in Vrabel's coaching career. He basically pulled a Belichick on that in that playoff game against the Titans in 2019, Brady's last game in New England. Vrabel's there doing that, using the clock loophole, taking the false starts and delay of games on the punt to wind the clock down in the fourth quarter, which we saw Bill do it earlier on in the year against the Jets. So it was basically like throwing it right back in Bill's face. So if there's any guy that I wanted to come in and maybe, separate yourself a little bit from Bill, like it's time to move on. And I've heard this argument about Vrabel that he's just another Bill disciple. Yes, he played for Bill for 8 years, but his coaching career stems so far away from Bill. It's not funny. Like Ohio State, immediately after he retired as a player, he went back to his alma mater, coach with, I forgot who the head coach was right when he got there, but Urban Meyer quickly came on and kept him on. He went to Houston with Bill O'Brien. Yes, Bill O'Brien is a Bill disciple, but they
ran different programs.
Exactly. Having his own head coaching job in Tennessee, now back to Cleveland before coming here. Like, if you go back to his college playing days back in the 90s, out of 30 years of between college and professional football, only 8 of them were spent with Bill, and that was as a player. So the argument that, it's just another Bill guy, it really isn't, is the point. But he does bring some of those qualities that Bill did, where attention to detail, clock management, knowing the rules better than your opponent, and yes, getting the most out of the guys in your locker room, no matter the talent, whatever the talent level is. I think that's just
good coaching. I don't think it's fair to say, like, Dan Campbell coaches that same way, and people don't call him like a Belichick wannabe. Like, I don't think it's a fair argument. I think you wanted a good coach, a guy that's going to lead men. They're going to kind of have Belichick type qualities. That's what you want in a coach, and that's why Belichick is one of the greatest coaches of all time. So I think it's just a wild argument, probably.
Yeah, but my point being is, you've heard a lot of talk this week where when the choices were narrowing down, that, well, you want to separate yourself from Bill a little bit, which I get. The way it ended with Bill was not pretty. But I'm just saying, throwing Vrabel into that group of Bill disciples is just not correct.
I agree.
Well, and can we say too that the end of the Belichick era as a coach was not even close to as bad as the end of the Belichick era as the GM and roster management?
Correct.
Two very different things. And so I think being compared to the end of the Belichick era coach is nowhere near as much a slap in the face as what is being compared to, just strictly Belichick and Vrabel. Vrabel's not coming in and being asked to make all of the personnel decisions and negotiate contracts and keep or cut players. And so luckily, they should build a established room around him to be able to take some of that off of his shoulders so that he can build the culture. I think that it's important that he has a voice in that process in order to be able to bring in the guys that he feels as though is going to get him farther along in that process as fast as possible. But it's more about bringing in the right kinds of talent that's going to be able to inspire this young core of players and the players that we're going to be drafting here in a few months.
And Nate, I think that's a perfect segue into now that we got Vrabel, who's calling the shots in player personnel, because it comes to the next question. What happens with Elliott Wolf now that Vrabel is in the door? And I think we start to get part of that answer today, because I'm just going to read off the exact tweet that came off. What was it? In 2 hours after the Vrabel news broke, from Charles Robinson, a reporter at Yahoo Sports. Quote, I'm hearing Giants personnel advisor Ryan Cowden is expected to be added to the Patriots personnel mix, but not with a GM title. I believe Elliott Wolf will retain personnel power. However, Cowden's addition to the front office is Vrabel's preference. Dynamics will be interesting. End quote. What do you make of that?
And am I incorrect in thinking that the only general manager in Patriots history was Bill Belichick?
By title, yes. But even when Bill got here, you got, I'm blanking on the name in 2000 that he inherited, but he was gone after the draft. But you had guys like Scott Pioli in here, who Nick Caserio, not the.
They were never a GM.
Yeah.
By title, correct, but
right.
All intents and purposes, they held that role.
So, Fink, let's hear your thoughts on bringing in that other voice to pair or maybe oppose Elliott Wolf.
See, I think it's tough because we didn't really get it's tough to judge Elliott Wolf. I think if Elliott Wolf was here 3 years and we brought in a new coach, I would say you got to get rid of Elliott Wolf, let Vrabel bring in who he wants to bring in. I think that'd be the right thing to do. But I think now it's kind of tough, because Wolf has that prospect grading system that they hardly used last year before the draft. So I'm curious to see how that is. I'm really curious to see how that goes, because I'm up for anything with our drafting. I said on the last episode, they can't draft. So I think it's a weird thing, because I think Vrabel has the right to want his own guys for sure. I just think it's going to be a weird dynamic if you have a GM or whatever Wolf is, and then a guy kind of right under him, kind of watching over him. It kind of feels like with that move. That's kind of my thoughts. I don't know.
And
it's kind of weird.
Yeah. The only pushback I would have on that is, yes, it's a weird dynamic, but is it a weirder dynamic a year from now where the guy that Elliott Wolf picks in the draft or picks up in free agency doesn't pan out, and now you have the head coach and GM pointing fingers at one another hey, that's not my guy. I didn't want him, back and forth, where you didn't have that cohesive unit, which you already saw that last week with Elliott Wolf throwing the coaching staff under the bus with Jalen Polk, saying, well, we would have liked to have seen a little bit more internal development out of him. We viewed him as a plug and play guy. You're just saying that because McConkley just went off for nearly 200 yards in a playoff game. Let's call a spade a spade. I'm for the decision that is going to bring the most stability and more respect to this organization, because let's face it, in the last 3 to 4 years, we've lacked in both categories. So Vrabel is here for the long run in terms of the foreseeable future. The jury's still out on Elliott Wolf, so I think the say should lie with Vrabel of who he wants.
Fink, go ahead.
I had a thought, but I kind of lost it. So, Nate, your turn.
Yeah, so I think if it's cool with you guys, I want to kind of shift gears into what's next in this very early stages of the Vrabel decision, and who's going to be calling plays. So we've identified some targets or some guys that we think are on the offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator shortlists. And so going through those really, really quick, I think is a pretty easy next step. What do you guys think of that?
I agree. Definitely need coordinators before we do anything else. So might as well go that route on the pod too.
I like where your head's at. So I think the easy one and the one that most people have connected is Josh McDaniels. And so that's where take everything that we just talked about, how Vrabel is not a Belichick guy, and just throw it out the window. Obviously, the connection between McDaniels and Belichick, and then the connection between McDaniels and Vrabel, actually good close friends. Obviously, the Patriot ties off the field, and both without coaching jobs this offseason, or this previous season rather. But looking at the connection between McDaniels, he went to a number of different college campuses this offseason to learn some of the more innovative and up and coming topics of. Oh, and we lost Nick again. Boy,
I knew that was going to happen because he's been lagging up a storm. I thought it was me because my school Wi-Fi is not great, but I knew it wasn't. He needs. If you're a fan, if you're a listener of ours, donate in our Twitter bio. We'll put a link in there. We're going to upgrade Nick's Wi-Fi.
Yeah,
we'll
no
put a link
kidding.
in bio. A little GoFundMe. So
I mean,
help Nick out.
just looking at the McDaniels coaching arc, if you will. So obviously he had Brady when he came in the 07 era of he was the Patriots offensive coordinator, and he was the Patriots quarterbacks coach in 04 and 05 before moving to offensive coordinator in 06. And so obviously when you have a guy like Tom Brady that's throwing the ball, he makes your job pretty easy and he makes you look pretty good. But I think that's the job of the offensive coordinators, to put your guys in position for success. Right. And so if you take the Brady era, if you take the Cam Newton era, or if you take the first year of Mac Jones, he was able to get an extraordinary high level of play out of all three of those guys, and obviously very, very different play styles, all three of which were different play styles than Drake. But it gives me encouragement that a guy like that is going to be able to get the most out of a young quarterback.
Yeah, he definitely can adapt, and I think we've seen it. And like you took the words out of my mouth. Obviously, having Tom Brady does help you because it's the greatest quarterback of all time. Like it's Tom Brady. There's not much else to say. But yeah, I mean, Cam Newton came in here and balled out with like no one on the outside besides Edelman, but he was banged up after that Seattle game. And then yeah, with Mac, they make the playoffs in the first year. So I think Josh McDaniels is probably the guy. I think we talked about it last pod too. He's our guy, and we'll see if he's their guy. He probably is. He's Vrabel's guy, if I had to guess. So, wish Nick was here.
Yeah, so moving to a couple of other candidates that we've heard of, one of which is Josh McCown, who was a NFL quarterback for a long time. And so he has emerged as one of those young up and coming guys that is obviously well known in the league for his play style, but he's earning his stripes in the coaching ranks. And so he served in 2023 as the Carolina Panthers quarterbacks coach. Whether or not that was a success is probably debatable because Bryce Young didn't look great. And then he's been the Minnesota Vikings quarterbacks coach this year, which I think, this has been light years ahead for Sam Darnold and his development. Obviously, it's kind of hitting some roadblocks here at the very end of the year, but Sam Darnold has looked really, really good to finish this season. And so I think that if we're looking for that next Ben Johnson, the next guy that could be that offensive guru, and a guy that obviously he's been in that position before, he's been a quarterback for a number of years in this league. And so a guy that can really mentor Drake, particularly if we keep Milton as our backup and having two young guys in that quarterback room, having a guy that has that veteran presence, but is also going to be there to be able to coach, to call plays on the offensive sideline, is going to be a major advantage. And so that's the biggest piece for me. That's the most attractive for McCown. Yeah. And so talking about Josh McCown learning under KOC, obviously KOC is one of those coaches that He, again, rose through the ranks at a pretty young age, and he was identified as a guy that was one of those innovators of football. And so learning under a guy like that and being able to, again, get the most out of the players that you have, because let's be honest, this roster is not going to be fixed in 1 year. And so being able to get the most out of the players that are already here is going to be a major, major piece of the development of this core of this franchise as we continue to progress on.
And I think we already saw that. Like last year, we had the same defense pretty much last year, and it was a top 10 group. And we had Bill Belichick, who is known for getting the best out of literally anybody, make a lacrosse player into something good. So, like, that's what you need, especially in football. You need someone that's going to uplift you every day, challenge you to get better, push you to get better, care for you, care about the person next to you, like instill all these winning qualities in you. That's what you need in a coach, and that's exactly what Mike Vrabel brings. Yes, he's not the offensive guru Ben Johnson is, but the things that he's going to do for everyone in that locker room and the people that we pick up is going to be hopefully head and heels over what we've seen.
And here's my question to you, because this was certainly more of a question prior to the decision to actually hire Vrabel. However, if we're comparing Vrabel, who has an established process and the ability to build a culture and a dynamic within a locker room that fosters winning, whereas he can hire the OC and maybe he can find the next Ben Johnson, or you hire the next Ben Johnson, or you hire Ben Johnson, which obviously at this case, he's not coming to New England. We already know that. But you hire the offensive guru hoping that he can create that dynamic and that culture, which I think we kind of just saw that in New England, right? We hired the guy that was the young up-and-coming coach. He had a lot of promise. He had a lot of clout in Gillette and in New England, but he hadn't proven that he was able to build a culture, and that's one of the biggest reasons that I think that he's now ushered out the door is that culture building. And so to me, to answer my question before I throw it to you, it's going to be, I'd rather have the guy that can build the culture and then go find the next Ben Johnson. Maybe it is a guy like I'm about to mention here, and that's Tommy Rees. But before I move on to Tommy Rees, tell me about, that dichotomy of that question for me.
Can you shorten up the question for me? Put it nice and sweet.
So tell me, would you rather have the coach that has the established culture building process and maybe can go out and hire the offensive guru, or would you rather have the offensive coordinator that needs to? It's up in the air whether or not they're going to be able to build.
Yeah, I got your question. I would definitely rather have the culture, because you can find not anybody, I should say, but you can find a guy like in college football. You can find a young guy like that, bring him up to coach the offense and really like get a feel for things. You could find Josh McDaniels, someone who's done it before, but it's football. You need a culture. You need an identity. That's one of the biggest things in football. You can have all the talent in the world, but if you're not leading them, then that doesn't really do much for you. Look at the Chargers. Last year, tons of talent. Brandon Staley, obviously not the guy. Harbaugh comes in. They're a playoff team. Didn't go well last night, but it's just a culture thing. It's guys just having people bought into a common idea and just leading a group of men. Like, that's what you need in football, I think, more than hiring Ben Johnson, who we don't know if he can lead a group of guys. Like, yeah, he can draw up anything you want and get you points anytime you need, but can he lead a group of men? No. Dan Campbell can, obviously. So Dan Campbell doing that makes Ben Johnson's life a lot easier. He doesn't really need to worry about that. But culture is where I would start, and we didn't have that last year with Mayo, and I would argue it. I mean, we had it with Belichick, you always do, but kind of lost it towards the end. Like, it didn't really, because everyone knew what was coming. Belichick's on the way out, and we're not a competitive team. They were on one side of the ball, the defense, but yeah, I think Vrabel, it probably should have been done last year because we'd already been a year into the process and his culture and his vision, but they finally made the right move, we hope. So that's my answer.
And keep in mind too that, I mean, Vrabel has done it before, right? He identified Matt LaFleur, and obviously Matt LaFleur in Green Bay has succeeded in lots of different ways. He found Arthur Smith, and Arthur Smith sure didn't work out in Atlanta, but he was a guy that was pretty well renowned in the football space and a very good football mind. And so he's proven that not only can he build the culture, he's also proven that he can go out and he can find that outside talent to be able to bring in and lead the offensive side of the ball, as he's naturally more of a defensive guy. So who that offensive mind might be, it might be a guy like Tommy Rees. So Tommy Rees is currently in the Browns organization as the passing game specialist and tight ends coach, but he's also served as the offensive coordinator and play caller. Very important caveat, because Alex Van Pelt had never called plays before, and neither had Covington, but I'm talking about offense here. So he was the play caller at Alabama in 23 and Notre Dame in 2020 through 2022. And one thing that I really want to kind of harp on here for just a second before we move on to the other side of the ball and then close out this emergency pod, but he's the tight ends coach. And why that's so important is tight ends are obviously so integral in both the passing and the running game. And so you get both aspects there that you have to be prepared for and game plan for. And so particularly at a organization like the Cleveland Browns that has David Njoku, who is one of the offensive cogs that makes that organization go. So being able to again, put those players in position for success is the name of the game, and why I think that Tommy Rees might be a pretty attractive candidate.
No, I like that. I know Nick had a guy to talk about, but unfortunately he's not here, so we can't talk on that.
He's going to talk about Luke Sickle, and we'll let him break that down maybe next Patriots pod.
Yeah, we'll let that happen. I think for me, it's probably Josh McDaniels. It just makes the most sense. I don't know how great of a choice it is, because he's been here. This will be his third stint.
It'll be his third stint.
Yeah, so there's that.
One thing you don't have to worry about with Josh McDaniels is you don't have to worry about him going to a head coaching job after.
Yeah, we know that's never happening. So, yeah, because that hasn't worked out. But, I mean, I guess that we can flip to the defensive side.
Last pod, we talked Robert Saleh. And so kind of explain your thoughts, as I know that you are a Saleh guy, I think.
I'm a solid guy for what he brings off the field, I think. I don't know too much about the intricacies of what he likes to do on defense. I know you said we talked a little before the pod, he's a zone guy. Obviously, that wouldn't play into our strengths, I don't think. And he's really strong up the middle, which is what you mentioned last pod, which is something we really need to work on. But I just love what he brings off the field, because having a guy like Vrabel, I just went on like a 5-minute rant about how he leads men and how important that is. Having another guy that's going to reciprocate the same messages to a very important unit on the defensive side of the ball, like, I think that would be a great thing to have. You need someone that's going to say the same things, have the same mindset as Vrabel, that's been there before. He's been a head coach. He was successful in San Francisco, and that's mostly why I lean Saleh, because we're a young team. I would say a lot of inexperience. I think you need just as many leaders around an inexperienced group to lead them to a goal, which whatever their goal might be, it could be just to make the playoffs. That's still a common goal. And having a few different, two voices like that, guys that have been there, done it, would be a great. I think that's why I lean Saleh. And you can tell me your thoughts now too. I'll allow that.
Yeah, so I mean, to me, just to one quick caveat before we'll throw it to Nick for any of his input on OC or DC. But to your point, we want a guy that's going to come in on the offensive side of the ball, and he's going to build around Drake and get the most around Drake and put Drake in position for success. I think similarly on the defensive side of the ball, we have a in my opinion, all-pro, apparently to the NFL stage, not so much, but an all-pro cornerback in Gonzo. And so you want somebody that's going to come in, get the most out of that player, and then build around that player in a really meaningful way. And obviously Gonzo's strength is man-to-man. And so a zone first kind of guy in Saleh, the fit from a leadership standpoint absolutely is there, but from a scheme standpoint, I don't necessarily know if it's there. And I do think it's going to be tough to pry him out of the San Francisco job. So that'll be an interesting thing to watch. But Nick, what are your thoughts on OC-DC before we move into a quick 1-2 on drafts and close out our emergency pod?
So first off, sorry for my disappearance. 21st century technology strikes again, ruining everything.
Yours is more like 20th century though. So
yeah, we already put in the pod to have our viewers send you some money to upgrade the Wi-Fi.
Yeah, we're gonna start a
Thank you.
GoFundMe for you.
Yeah.
I will not turn down free money. But in terms of want to talk about offensive side of the ball, I'm sure you guys mentioned Josh McDaniels. Like that's the one name that keeps coming up simply because it's going to bring consistency and stability with Drake. You don't want him to have 3 OCs in 3 years. And as it got reported today, that what we're not thinking about, like we always think about that with quarterbacks, but think about Ramondre Stevenson in the backfield. In his 5-year career, he's had 5 different offensive coordinators if Josh McDaniels isn't the one that's brought back. So frankly, I choose Josh McDaniels for the familiarity, the structure, the just knowing that he isn't leaving for a head coaching job anytime soon, if ever. But if it isn't Josh McDaniels, the one thing I just ask is make sure there's a pipeline in place. And what I mean by that is if whoever the new hotshot offensive coordinator is that comes in and leaves in a year or 2, you have someone to promote internally to keep the structure in place. So that's what I'm more focused on if you don't go McDaniels, and a couple of names to just keep a lookout for. If anyone read Alex Barth's article this morning talking about potential offensive coaching disciples, one of the names that he put out there was Luke Steckel, currently the tight ends coach in Oakland or Vegas, I should say, who's helped develop Brock Bowers this year. He crossed paths with Mike Vrabel in his time in Tennessee. You bring a young guy like that over, and you make him the tight ends coach or running back coordinator or running game coordinator. Whoever OC, who the OC is, throw a name out there just for the argument. He leaves in a year or 2. All of a sudden, you have a guy right there to fill in and move up the ladder. And one other name that was thrown out there, and if you're going to go look in the college ranks to bring someone up for offensive side, why not go get Drake May's offensive coordinator at UNC that got the best year out of him in college in Chip Lindsey?
That's a great poll.
That's a good poll, Nick. That's really good. I like that.
Yeah, that's a name that I haven't necessarily heard floating around, but I think that's a great idea. Particularly, there's a lot of similarities. There's a lot of similarities to that kind of offense that we're looking to run. Is you swap out the Josh Downs and you get Pop Douglas. You swap out the Omarion Hampton and you get Ramondre Stevenson. Obviously, you have the constant B Drake. You go out and you get a guy that can replace the Tez Walker role. I think that makes a lot of sense.
I like that. That's a good
and
idea.
And in neither place was there an offensive line. So, hey.
Yeah.
But so last piece on coaching carousel, just before we move into some draft coverage, I think that we talked about this briefly off air before hitting the record button, but Wes Welker getting in Miami really is an intriguing option. I think that they were just looking for somebody to fall on the sword there because of all the missteps that organization has gone through, particularly on the offensive side of the ball. I don't think that Wes Welker is the one to necessarily be blamed for that, but I think that could be an awesome opportunity to bring in a guy again with New England ties that has had a tremendous amount of success here, that has some familiarity with the crafts, that could be a really logical step in making the receiving room a much more weaponized unit in terms of, again, getting the most out of your players, which seems to be the common theme for our pod today.
And I like the idea of Wes Welker. All the reports today and yesterday when he got let go was that he was a name to watch for upcoming offensive coordinator jobs. So for him to get let go there, if you're bringing him in to be the wide receivers coach, I really do love it. I'm not sure if I would love it if he's holding the offensive coordinator job title right at this very moment.
Agreed.
But to your point, it could be a pipeline. It could be a pipeline addition.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
He's learning
I was
under
going to say if he's coming in as a wide receiver.
Yeah, I like that idea a lot.
Another name to go that same route, going down to the Miami tree. I can't remember if he's still in Miami, but I know he left here being the wide receivers coach to follow Brian Flores down to Miami when he took the job, but Chad O'Shea. He was here through the second half of the second part of the dynasty as the wide receivers coach, and he coached under McDaniels. So if you brought McDaniels back as OC, if you're not getting Welker, Chad O'Shea would be a name I would also like to see them bring back.
So I think we're running a little longer on this emergency pod than we initially anticipated, and we apologize to our producer for that. But he's not here to stop us. So anyway,
that's true. That's what happens if he's not here telling us in the chat to wrap it up. So
with that said, how do you guys think that the Vrabel hiring is going to impact, the potential of drafting at number 4 or potentially moving from that spot? But how do you think it impacts our draft preparation?
I don't think it impacts it all too much. I think what's going to impact it, like we discussed last week, was the free agency. Which route do they take in free agency? Which targets do they identify, and which targets do they actually land? Do I think it means they lean offense or defense at 4 more so than the other? I can't say that I do. What I will say is I think what impacts it, if he's still there at 4, the game Abdul Carter just had last week, I know it came in a loss, but whoa, boy, that guy can play. And if you can get him on, if you get him on the defensive side of the ball with a defensive head coach like Vrabel, it might not be the tackle or the wide receiver that we want, but that would feed families.
Yeah, I think
go for it.
I think it changes a little bit in the sense that I think they now have I think they draft someone for one of the lines, I think is what they do. I think it's going to be a guy that Vrabel wants to coach up, that's young, coachable. So I think it's going to be one of the tackles, Banks or Campbell or Carter, someone that just can change the game on either line, which we also lack. I'm a big Tat McMillan guy. I think we need playmakers, but now that Vrabel is the guy, I think it's going to be to get someone to bolster one of the lines and really start to form an identity that we're going to punch you in your mouth and you're going to have to deal with it for 60 minutes every Sunday. And I think that's the route they probably go.
Yeah, I think
and
for
then
me,
just
the
throw
only thing
money.
it does.
Yeah, I'm done. You go.
I was going to say the only thing that I think that it does is shorten that list up. Obviously, last episode we did talk a lot about Tet McMillan. I don't necessarily see that same fit anymore. Obviously, there's a lot that can change, and with free agency before the draft, there's a lot of different routes, as Nick just alluded to. There's a lot of different routes that they could go. But with that said, as we currently stand here on January 12th, I think that the list shortened to Kelvin Banks Jr., which Mel Kiper just released his mock draft 1.0 and had Kelvin Banks Jr. as the number 1 tackle in this year's draft. You also have a guy like Will Campbell, who I think that his combine is going to be so important to his draft stock. And everything that I keep hearing about Will Campbell is his makeup's amazing, his physicality is amazing, his pass blocking is amazing, his run block is amazing, but his arms are too short. I hate when we use so-called standardized metrics to rate these prospects and their ability, because obviously a guy like Tom Brady didn't grade out all that well in terms of where he landed in combine, but obviously it was his makeup that made up the difference. And so I think Campbell fits really well.
I will say people were right about Kenny Pickett's hands being too small, so there is that.
I mean, there are some things, right, that
no, I don't love the arm argument. It's kind of a weird thing. One thing I was going to say, though, you didn't really hint on it, but kind of going back to McMillan, the only way I could see them taking him is kind of because Vrabel, they had A.J. Brown in Tennessee. Obviously, he soured that relationship, but that's a big-time playmaker that they drafted. So maybe Vrabel wants to go that route again in New England and not mess it up with a 6'5" potential stud and keep him around a little bit. But that was my final thought on that.
I blame the AJ Brown situation on the front office. Vrabel wanted to keep him, and the front office didn't want to pay him, and then decided to ship him out so they could draft was it Corey Davis?
Traylon Burks.
Oops.
And as you can see with Tennessee firing that bozo this week who decided to trade AJ Brown for Trey Burks. I think Vrabel in the end was right on that one. So I don't think it was fair for Vrabel to get the heat of the
That's
situation
fair.
with AJ Brown. That
But yeah,
it
that's
definitely
why
falls
that's
back
just why
on the front
McMillan
office.
thought. Yeah, I agree with that take. I think that's fair.
Fink, any final thoughts?
I'm really optimistic now. I think it's a good step in the right direction. We talked a lot about leading men, coaching up who you have, making the best of what you have, because at the end of the day, it's what you got. It's what you have to go to battle with for 17, 18 weeks. So I think it's the right call. It might not be the exciting call, like Ben Johnson would have been exciting, don't get me wrong. But I think it's the right call, and I think it's what we needed, and I'm hopeful and I'm excited.
Nick?
My final thoughts are, I think we're just scratching the surface of this offseason. Like this was the first move that needed to happen. It's not necessarily the biggest move that needed to happen. At the end of the day, talent wins football games. There's a lot of talent that's lacking on this roster, and there's a lot of ways to fix it. Unfortunately, can't do that overnight. So I think next week, I don't know what's on tap. I know people who are listening to this on Monday, you're going to get our regularly scheduled Tuesday morning podcast on the Red Sox. But if we're talking Pats next week, I think we're going to start having a list narrowed down of what coaches are coming in more so than players. Because let's face it, free agency is still a couple months away. But I think next time we talk Pats, we're going to have at least a little bit more of a blueprint of how this offseason is going to go, at least in the coaching ranks.
Yeah, and I think my final thought is just to share that sentiment with you, Fink. I think there's a lot of reason to be excited. I think that after the year that we just had, being able to look forward and feel that change in the air, feel that optimism again, it does wonders for the Patriots' soul. And I think that, again, it just opens up so many opportunities having an established guy with a proven track record. You now have the guy here behind me that's going to be leading the way on the offensive side of the ball, making it an attractive place for free agents to sign or put us in position to draft high quality talent. And so I think there's a lot of reason to be optimistic. And to your point, Nick, we're going to be talking blueprint all off season long, as that is what we have promised to do. But of course, if you have made it this far in the podcast, I greatly appreciate that. We all greatly appreciate that. Thank you so much. And if you haven't already, go find us on socials. Boston Banner BP on Twitter and X/X, Boston Banner Blueprint on Facebook and Instagram, and then on Spotify, Apple, or YouTube, Boston Banner Blueprint. Go find us, go follow us, like the videos, comment, interact with us. We're happy to have, debates, conversations, but we want to keep growing this platform so we can keep sharing this content with you all. Thank you all so much.